Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Charlottesville Civilian Oversight Board to order. The first item of business we have is announcements, shout outs for the good of the community. Anyone have anything they'd like to say?
I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Chair, for continuing this work. That's important, leading this effort. Mr. Aguilar as well. Obviously, it's been a little silent, but thank you both.
Yeah, no problem. As far as I'm concerned. Let's see. Okay, we did post the minutes. Does anyone have any comments, or would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion.
Is there a second? Mr. Aguilar, would you poll the group, please?
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter, I'm sorry, I didn't register the vote. Member Carpenter,
Oh, she's muted.
I didn't hear my name.
It's like
I didn't hear you call my name. But I, of course, approve the minutes.
okay. Member Frazier,
Sorry, yes, I was muted.
okay. I don't see Member Gilmore. Chair Mendez
yes.
and Vice Chair Watson.
Approve, or yes.
And the minutes are approved with our thanks. Thank you, Hansel. And now we can move on to our agenda, which was also posted on the website. Anyone have any comments on the agenda? Would someone move to approve the agenda then?
Make a motion.
Second?
Second.
Yeah. Mr. Aguilar?
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
She might be frozen.
Member
Yeah.
Carpenter,
She's got, yeah, you got the message there.
okay.
Can she vote by chat?
I think she's going to sign back on.
Okay. Chair Mendez
Yes.
and Vice Chair Watson.
Yes.
We can wait a moment for Ms. Carpenter.
I'm usually the one with the delayed internet.
There we go.
And
Am I
Member
moving
Carpenter.
around now? Do I look live?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, if the agenda vote, yeah.
Okay, all right. I heard it. So we've approved the agenda, which is heavy on issues related to training in our hearing, which we will discuss in a while. The next item is I'd like to give a brief account of the City Council discussion of our operating procedures, which they undertook at their April 18th meeting. If you remember, we had a special meeting on the 23rd of March to approve the substance of the procedures and send it to the council for discussion. At the April 18th meeting, the topic was on the agenda, but it was listed for discussion only. And no vote was taken. We asked why this was the case, and that speedy action be taken for the counselors. And we asked whether they had any substantive concerns that would keep them from taking a vote. And We received a number of comments. My impression was that having just emerged from budget hell, they had not had a lot of chance to actually look at the operating procedures. And it was suggested that it would probably be prudent to put off taking a vote until we had dealt with our single outstanding case. And they were asking whether, can we pull off a real hearing? The mock hearing, we've heard it didn't go so well. And trying to establish new operating procedures when we don't even have the old ones dealt with would just confuse us. And wouldn't the board learn useful lessons from the hearing that we're gonna get? And this was not particularly satisfactory, obviously. So, after a fair amount of discussion fairly late into the evening, we made this sort of informal agreement that the board would move forward on our case as quickly as we could, and while assuring that the hearing would be fair and consistent with the existing ordinance and the interim procedures. And in return, the council agreed to provide substantive comments on the operating procedures within 30 days. And it's not 30 days yet, and so we haven't heard anything back at this point. I didn't sense that there was any deep resistance, but there sure was a heck of a lot of hesitancy to take a vote on an issue that they were not very comfortable that they fully understood. So given that we're committed to moving forward on the hearing, you'll see that a lot of Hansel's report deals with hearing preparation, and it's going to require a lot of work and commitment for us to get ready and get it done in a timely fashion. Hansel, do you have any comments at this point?
Not at this point, sir.
Okay. Anyone else on the board have any questions or comments?
Go ahead.
Dr. Frazier.
Real quick, Mr. Chair, do we have a tentative date for that? Where are we with getting it scheduled, or do we need to finish the training first?
Well, we talked about that for a while. Hansel and I talked about that for a while, and we're hoping that we can get the training and another set of mock hearings done by the second week of July. And so there's a kind of a tentative hold a date for that second Thursday. And that would be basically our normal meeting time. So
we would hold a mock hearing during our normal meeting time?
No, the idea, and Hansel will go into this during his report, is that we've got a sort of a list of training items that we need to address. And the last on those is that we will have 2-on-1 mock hearings with a synthetic internal affairs file and a relevant body-worn camera footage, and it'll be 2-by-2 pairs of us. So we'll get another rehearsal. We'll each get another rehearsal in, and then the actual hearing on the Mr. Fogel's case would be on or about the 14th of July. Okay.
And is that okay, gotcha.
And we have ascertained that Mr. Fogel is available during that period. So
So I was, the reason why I was asking is because if that's our normal meeting and we do have business that we have to address, it is my understanding that the city has provided the opportunity to have an additional meeting. And so essentially, we would wipe out our general business meeting with with the hearing. And I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot of work that we're obviously doing. I would want to continue that work, but also utilize that extra meeting for the hearing itself.
Yeah, we're not set. I mean, this is 2 months away. So the final schedule, there's a lot of steps that we have to go through until we decide that we're ready. And if we need to have a special meeting that would supplement our regular meeting, we can certainly do that in sometime in July. I don't see any problem with that. And and the idea is that this is the main hurdle to us becoming the Civilian Oversight Board, in fact, rather than just in name. And so getting this out of the way removes at least one more excuse for the city council for not voting on the final operating procedures.
Was this a consensus view, or was this? I mean, and it's my apologies for not having gone back and watched the video at this point. But was this a consensus, or was this a 1 or 2?
It was I think the board, the council was willing to give the mayor a lot of deference, but there were other people who were definitely not ready to vote and who saw the merit in having us pursue the hearing first.
Fair enough.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. It is the next item on our agenda is, I believe, the.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
I was muted at this point in time, but I do. I do recognize that Councilor Payne is in the audience. If he would be willing to, I guess, kind of provide more insight on the council's thinking.
Here he is.
Sorry, your audio cut out for like 10 seconds when I was being promoted to panelist.
We were actually inviting you to put in your 2 cents.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we had the conversation at that council meeting, and I think the direction was just wanting to for council not to be delaying this or to be indefinitely pushing it away, and to not create any sense or expectation that that's what we want to do, but that we are interested in seeing that hearing being conducted, both to give a little bit more urgency to get that done, and also to give both the board and council and the executive director some just more information about how that goes that may provide some data about how we approach the operating procedures. But I don't know if that helps clarify it for any of you all, but that was the conversation.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Counselor. Any other hands raised here? Okay. And the next item on their agenda is our first public comment period. Mr. Trail, are you here, or Hansel?
No, Chair Mendes, from here on out, I'm going to be doing those duties as well. We're a little light on our communications department at the moment.
All right.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to speak to the Police Civilian Oversight Board, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, press *9. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes. Please share your place of residence when you begin.
Does not appear that there are any hands raised.
We do have a hand raised from Councilor Payne.
Mr. Payne, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just because from the previous topic, there's one thing I forgot is that I do think council's at a consensus of, at a minimum, once that hearing is done, that council will be voting and making a decision on the operating procedures within 30 days of that. I forgot that piece of it, but I did think council was definitely aligned on that. Again, just to be really clear that we do not want to indefinitely delay this or have it be pushed back forever. Like we want to be able to take action. So anyway, that was the last piece, but thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Brown.
So for, I guess for Councilor Payne, so it's prior to you being promoted, I believe the chair had stated that from the last meeting, within 30 days, there would be some sort of reply from council. Is it my understanding that it's now 30 days from when we actually hold that particular hearing?
My understanding of the discussion at the council meeting that it was council voting on them 30 days after conducting of the hearing.
And also, I'd just like to say that, you know, one of my major concerns was that there, and you know, because of very understandable circumstances, it did not seem that the city council had engaged with the substance of the operating procedures prior to our discussion at the council meeting. And I just wanted to issue an invitation to people, you know, like Sina, I know, who had, you know, some, you know, very legitimate concerns, to raise those as soon as they came up.
I think that's a very good point, and I will send an email this evening to counselors reminding them of that, because I think that's accurate, and there's a lot of substance to dig into that it would be good for council to get a lead on before it is in front of us at a meeting.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, and I, yeah, I would, I don't know how to say this. I would appreciate that sense of urgency. I think when we came at this last year, and even the year before, it was my understanding that now Mayor Snook was urging the prior council to be, you know, more fully ahead and invested in understanding what this board is attempting to accomplish overall. And I would, I don't know, I would find it a 180 to, you know, kind of go the other direction. So I would respectfully hope that there is a sense of urgency in digging into this particular work.
I think that is a very fair point. You know, individually, I have read them before that meeting and gone through it and obviously been involved, but I agree with your point that, you know, council as a whole needs to have a lot of urgency and to have dug into the details and to be ready to have a substantive, meaningful discussion.
One suggestion, I mean, we'll move on to council's report and talk about our training. Is that Councilor, you might, or some of your colleagues might wish to dig into what we're doing as well in the way of training, looking at the documents and the videos that we're going to be learning from And that would be, perhaps helpful to you as well as to where we're coming from.
Agreed.
Also, Mr. Aguilar, there is no one with a hand raised for comments.
Not at this moment, sir.
All right. So the next item on our agenda is the introduction of Larry Jacobs, who's the Charlottesville Police Department's Fourth Amendment analyst. I've asked him to come here and speak briefly about his experience and what he does at the department. Mr. Jacobs, welcome.
Evening, everybody. I think probably would be best for me just to real briefly provide you some background regarding myself. I retired from the Portland Police Department after 20 years of service. During my service, I served as an officer, a field training officer, a uniform patrol sergeant, community policing sergeant, uniform patrol lieutenant in charge of special operations, gang enforcement, drugs, and vice. And then I spent several years as the internal affairs commander for the Portland Police Department as well. When I retired from the police department, I went back to school full time and completed my master's degree in criminal justice, at which time I became a Virginia magistrate and worked in both the 5th District and the 24th District up until December of 2020, in which I accepted this position by Chief Brackney. As you're aware, I'm the only Fourth Amendment analyst for the police department. On average, the summers, winter's a little bit lighter with calls of service. Right now, calls of service are picking up. So we average, the police department, I would say, averages around 130 calls for service a day. Each call has multiple officers responding to it, and most, or they should all be recording those incidents with body worn footage and camera. So just to give you an idea of a particular situation, we could have one call for service with multiple officers on scene. That call for service could last over an hour, and multiple officers could have over an hour of footage with their body worn camera. So it's impossible for one person to analyze all that data. So what I attempt to do is triage the information that I'm receiving so that I can determine where to best put my efforts to review the officer's contacts with the public. So the first thing I do is I triage all the daily activity from the police department for every day. So I'll go through the dispatch records first to determine if there was any arrests, detentions, summons issued, reports taken, or any unusual activity, and I'll get back to that in a second. I highlight those, and then I go back and review those particular body worn camera footage to see what transpired during those incidents. And then there should be corresponding paperwork to align with what I'm seeing regarding arrest reports or summonses issued by the officers towards citizens. I'm mostly concerned with investigative detentions of the officers. And I know that's part of the training this evening, so I'll be happy to get back and talk on that a little bit as well. So I need to assure that they're actually documenting those detentions when they occur. When I find that they do not, or they have not documented that incident, I notify the chief of police and the captain of uniform patrol, advise them of the situation so that they can assure that that data is then uploaded so that I can review the written summation versus what I've seen on video. Sometimes I have to go and look at both the report, the body worn camera footage, and the arrest records as well, so that I get a clear picture of some incidents. Sometimes it's a little convoluted to determine every aspect or the proper aspects of consideration. So the report, for example, may not be thorough enough for me to make a determination. So I get most of my analysis done actually from the body worn camera footage that I'm able to review But of course, that doesn't provide all senses and every capable understanding of what an officer has knowledge of prior to that incident occurring, or other things that may be present that I wasn't aware of, such as smell of alcohol, other things like that. So I try to match that information up with the reports from what the officers have indicated what happened from this incident. And while I'm reviewing these videos, it's not my place to discipline officers or provide them legal oversight. If I see an issue or a problem based on my experience, I notify the chief of police, and then they conduct their own investigation into the matter, and they handle it how they deem it's best to be handled.
Well, thank you. My limited understanding of, I saw your hand, Bellamy. I'll be there in a second. So Fourth Amendment is search and seizure being detention. So what are you looking for in these various instances?
So, and I don't mean to speak down to anybody. I just want to make sure that we all, understand that there's a lot of case law at play in every incident. And I know that we don't have time to go into all aspects of that, and it's constantly changing anyway. But just so that we are clear on what we're talking about, the two things I'm looking at is probable cause and/or reasonable suspicion. So probable cause is, as established by the courts, is any fact that would cause a reasonable and prudent person to believe that a crime has occurred or will occur, and that probable cause is justification to arrest or seize somebody, or seize person, places, effects, or things. And of course, the Fourth Amendment is also has restrictions in place that some things are required in order for those things to happen. For example, the Fourth Amendment states that no seizure or arrest should occur unless a warrant has been issued by a magistrate or by a judge. So in the case where the magistrate or judge has already issued a warrant for arrest or issued a warrant for search and seizure, once that has gone through that judicial channel and been authorized, I review just the conduct of what happened during that incident. Reasonable suspicion, on the other hand, where most investigative detentions occur from officers initiated conduct, is normally governed by Terry versus Ohio. Those are facts and circumstances that don't meet the level of probable cause, but it is more than a hunch. It has to be articulable, and that can also be based on the officer's background, understanding, training, things the officer may be aware of, in addition to what facts and circumstances are occurring at that time. So when I'm reviewing that officer contact or those officer contacts, one, I try to determine whether or not there was any legal standing for the officer to begin with. Was the matter already judicially reviewed and a warrant was issued or a search warrant was issued? If those matters have already been addressed by the court or by the judicial system, I don't have to spend as much time focusing on the underlying probable cause for that behavior or that detention. Where we have problems or where problems often exist is when those warrants haven't been obtained beforehand and officers are basing their conduct and based on what they see happening and with their knowledge of what's going on to make a determination for arrest, summons, or an investigative detention in which the person could then be charged or released. So that investigative detention is that part of the Fourth Amendment that is governed by Terry versus Ohio under reasonable suspicion is what I spend a lot of time analyzing, most more in depth, I guess, than the other ones. Those other ones are reviewed as well, and if I see an issue with them, they're chief, but it's the ones where the officer don't already have established judicial standing in the matter. They don't have a warrant, they don't have a search warrant. They see something happen, and they react to that. And I review those reactions. There are several things that can lead to an investigative detention. Some of that will be covered, I guess, in your training as well. There's other case law that has standing in these matters as well. There's 13 search warrant exemptions. And some of that case law also affects officers' decisions, but Terry versus Ohio is a standing most important foundation of understanding of reasonable suspicion. So an officer can initiate an investigative detention of a person intentionally or unintentionally. So I'm looking at both. Was the contact consensual? Was it involving a minor? How many officers were present? Is it reasonable that the person would believe that they could be involved or free to go? So those are the things I'm looking at when I'm looking at the officer's conduct or contacts. And as I indicated, if I see an issue or see a problem or a training issue, then I address it with the chief, and the chief addresses it with the chain of command. I don't address any, as I stated, any officers directly. I may ask an officer for clarification regarding a particular matter, but anything regarding the chain of command's decision is handled by the chain of command.
Before I turn you over to, before I turn you over to Mr. Brown, one quick question. You also provide reports for the public?
Yes, sir. After I review all this data and get the reports that I need from the officers, documenting the detentions, I maintain and create a list of all that material, and then I transmit or translate all that into quantification, I guess is the best way to explain it, so they can be put into percentages and numbers so that the public can understand. And then I add that to the PowerPoint presentation that's released to council, the chief, and to the public. I've added numerous things to that since I've started. Chief Brackney allowed me to expand on those PowerPoint presentations because I felt that, for example, one of the particular slides explained what the investigative detentions were for. I thought that was important for the public to know, instead of just saying there were 13 or 14 or 20 officer involved investigative detentions. It was important for me to be able to list what they were so that people have a better understanding of why these people were being detained. So that's included as well.
Bellamy, you had some questions?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have a few. So I guess the initial, how do we do this? Specific, yeah. So I guess the initial one is, would you happen to know if there's a frequency in which body worn cameras are not worn or turned on during a particular incident?
I haven't ran across but a couple of situations in which, if I review as I indicated, the first thing I do is look at dispatch notes to triage what I need to look at. And then when I go to pull that body worn camera footage, if that hasn't been uploaded into the Axon system for me to review, then I notify the chain of command as well. Sometimes there's a delay because of the officer's work cycle. And there's been, I think, 1 or 2 incidents in which a camera was just not functioning or wasn't turned on. And when I cannot find that footage that I need to review a situation, I notify the chief of police, and that's also handled by the chain of command. But I've only seen that happen a couple of times since I started in December of 2020.
Okay.
Only if there's one perspective of an incident. Fortunately, in most cases, there are the benefit of having multiple officers on scene to deal with the situation, so I can look at it from different angles, even when a body worn camera was allegedly not working properly, or stopped working, or was damaged, or someone just forgot to cut it on. I'm able to also see incident behavior from other officers. Now, of course, if that was an initiating officer prior to other officers coming in contact, that could create a problem. So I refer that to the chief of police to address or try to find that body worn cameras for me.
So that last statement, if that particular incident did occur, that would fall under the chief of police purview to.
Yes, I notify the chief directly with any issues that I have regarding either reviewing the material or any conduct that I think needs to be reviewed by the chain of command. They review their own personnel anyway, but I'm just another layer that if I see an issue, I try to notify them, and they handle it the way they see appropriate.
And I just did a brief run through, but from Terry v. Ohio, is there a defined definition of reasonable suspicion? Are there elements? I know that it says that it can't be merely a hunch, but are there elements in that definition?
So, as we know from the probable cause standpoint, it doesn't take a lot to get to probable cause. So when you're looking at reasonable suspicion, there could be multiple elements to be taken into consideration. Those, again, the court stated those have to be articulable facts. That person has to be able to identify why they're doing what they did. Why did they stop this person? So they can't, and the reason that there isn't concrete language issued by the court that I'm aware of is because every situation is different, and it can include a lot of different things from the officer's background and experience and what they see happening. Under one set of circumstances, a situation could be completely inappropriate for detaining somebody, and in the same scenario, adding a couple of other factors can change the whole situation to authorize that detention.
And you just spoke about it. So is there a standard for specific and articulable?
So I'm trying to clarify that in my head. I thought
well, it's so, I mean, it's like sure, you can say that, okay, I saw, X person, acting erratically or what have you, and, just seemed to be out of order or what have you. I mean, yeah, sure, that's specific and articulable, but is it an objective standard or is it a subjective standard?
I understand what you're saying. So, an officer may say, for example, that the person was being disorderly. Well, that doesn't really explain anything to most people. What does disorderly mean? That can vary from one person to another person. So, when I'm reviewing that conduct or contact on the video, when I'm screening that information, I'm doing it from a outside perspective. There has to be more than just an officer's summation that the person was being disorderly. There has to be those other facts and circumstances that I can see, that I can pull from that information, the arrest reports, from what I see happening, to determine whether or not that reasonableness existed. But an investigative detention could also occur unintentionally from an officer. As I indicated earlier, if several officers approach a juvenile is surrounded, even if an adult is surrounded, I would make the determination under those circumstances that an investigative detention did exist. And if they hadn't already documented, I would then forward that information to the chief and have it documented. So that's happened numerous times. I normally I had a little bit more when I first started, but I probably average on between five or so a month that needs to be documented that are not documented, that I find through watching the video. I don't know if that clarifies your question entirely, because some information provided by the officers can be vague, reports can be vague, but I have a lot more clarity when I'm able to review the video myself and be able to determine whether or not that reasonable standard was met or not. And my definition of that reasonable standard is facts and circumstances short of probable cause. I mean, there is no concrete statement to state that, something over 50% judgment or anything like that. So, I mean, it has to be the totality of circumstance has to be taken into consideration for every incident. Flight alone, isn't enough for probable cause, but or even reasonable suspicion for that matter. But when you add multiple different elements to it, person screaming, pointing, all those things have come into factor also. So the whole totality of circumstance has to be considered as well.
And my final question, just write this down.
And I'm not making the officer's judgment for them. I'm
Sure.
reviewing just for clarification, I'm reviewing what has already occurred.
No, sure. Yeah. And as far as, is there a frequency of Fourth Amendment violations that has occurred, since you've come here? And if so, could you share what that is?
There was one incident when I first started that I identified. That was a problem. I don't know that I have the authority to speak on a particular officer's discipline or background or how much information I can provide that information to you. That is something that probably needs to be addressed by the chief's office. But an employee was terminated as a result of an unconstitutional stop.
Understood. But that's
the only incident that I've seen that was unconstitutional since I started.
Okay.
And that was and I notified Chief Brackney of that within a day or so, within 24 hours of the incident occurring.
Okay.
But I'm typically not able to review video that fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I'll flag a bunch of videos to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I guess in this case, I was starting, so the first one that I reviewed was a current incident just happened, so I didn't have a backlog to go back through. That was something that already been done before I started.
Sure. And you had triggered something else. So earlier you'd said that there's roughly 130 service calls a day. What is the, I guess, trigger mechanism or threshold that would lead you to look at a particular video?
So, like I said, the first thing I do is I try to I triage those calls for service because there's no way that I can review all of them. So as I go through the call log for the day through dispatch, I go through and I'm looking for arrest, mentions, or words indicating that there was a detention, a summons, or reportable incident in which an officer has identified that they needed to take a report, issue a summons, or arrested somebody. And then there are, on occasion, when I call anomalies or unusual activity. For example, like I stated, I have 20 years in law enforcement. So if I see 13 officers, at an alarm call, that would be unusual. So I would go look at the notes for that, and then dive into that call deeper to determine whether or not there was more going on, because of a simple situation could go from one thing and turn into something else completely. And it may not be documented properly in dispatch, not by any fault of anybody. It could just have been, for example, a 911 hang up and listed as no report taken or anything. But when you go back and look into it, you could actually see that the detention occurred, it wasn't documented, and that's why there's no report. So when I see that unusual activity, I'll go back and look at those incidents as well.
Those are all the questions that I have. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Jacobs? One quick question before we end, and that is, do you, we're police, we are aspiring to be police oversight, and our focus, police oversight board, and our focus will be on internal affairs investigations. Do you have any input or roles in any of those?
Not as I indicated. I was the prior internal affairs commander with Portsmouth. I have no direct relationship with internal affairs with the Charlottesville Police Department. I don't make any recommendations to IA, nor do I provide any information to them regarding what I've reviewed and what I document. If I see an issue, I direct it directly to the chief of police, and then the chief will direct it either to the chain of command or to internal affairs.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's important that since the goal of the organization is to create an oversight, that y'all is best that y'all form a strong relationship with internal affairs, since that's your frontline investigators that are going to provide you the information that y'all need for this oversight.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs. We appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
So our next agenda item is the Executive Director's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I go in there, I'm just gonna show the board how they can access Mr. Jacobs' reports on the website, the police website. Okay, so you should be looking, do you see the police website on your end?
Yeah.
Okay. So once you're there, you will go to Services and Education, and under Department Data, there's encounters leading to detentions. And he has categorized them by month. So if we're looking at the latest month, March, we're going to have his PowerPoint that he was saying. He provides the definitions, the ones he just went over. And then the data. So this is definitely going to be important for you as you move into policy recommendations, to being able to put some numbers behind what you're observing, because complaint data alone may not yield the strongest justification for policy recommendation, but you may have other data like this that can complement your policy recommendations.
And what's that file path again?
Sure. So once you're at the website, under Services and Education, there's the department data, and then you encounters leading to detentions.
Let's see.
So I have 15, just so y'all are aware, I have 15 work days to finish up the last month's information, to get that posted in PowerPoint format for your review. So I will have that to the chief by the 15th for the April data, so that the chief can review it and then we can post it.
Is there typically 1 month in arrears?
15 days. By the 15th, and most of the time I'm normally have it done by the 10th. But it will take me to the 15th, to the next week, to finish it up, because I was out with surgery for a few days, so. But it'll still be done within the 15 days.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll continue to the report. So the first part of the report is the section regarding the status of complaints. I forwarded those to you. And I apologize. I thought that I might have sent them before, and I don't know if I duplicated the emails, but moving forward, once we get the computers, which I'll talk about that a little shortly, we'll be having that all warehouse within our SharePoint. But since your last meeting, there were 2 initial complaints received. 2 closure letters received, and the 2 closure letters were for one complainant. She filed 2 separate complaints. And there was one inquiry where a community member was seeking more information about the process, but has not filed a complaint yet. In one of the initial complaints, the complainant was reporting an incident where a female officer was apparently driving the wrong way, and it appeared to be a 1-lane street, and told the complainant, use profanity in quotes. It says, "I'm a fucking cop, you fucking dickhead." And that was the basis of the complaint. That's in the hands of Internal Affairs. They're looking into that. The complainant was a male, and did not self-report the race or ethnicity. In the other complaint that you received, a female complainant, who identified race and ethnicity as other, indicated that on a particular incident, where a family member was involved in a vehicle collision, the police officers were discourteous, and they've at one point pushed either her and or the witness away from the scene. And when she tried to speak with a sergeant on the scene about the incident, felt that the sergeant was being dismissive about her concerns and about the way they were treating the complainant and about their concerns with the family member. That complaint is with Internal Affairs and it's being investigated. And in the closure letters, the complainant, all of the allegations of the complainant were unfounded, so that would be eligible for review should that complainant request it.
And was this for a past? This was for a past complaint, not for one of the 2 you just mentioned.
That's correct. This was for one that you actually received in your last meeting,
Okay.
or the time around your last meeting. Okay. The other element of my report was the hearing process, as Chair Mendes was stating, and as Councilor Payne is stated tonight, that there's a real interest with the City Council to move forward with the hearing before other items can be addressed, to include the operating procedures. So to accomplish that, rather than going through the robust training curriculum that we have developed in the last few months, what we're going to do to expedite that process is have targeted training on that's going to prepare you for this particular pending hearing review. The pending allegation is a use of force or response to resistance. So we're going to tailor the training, which I included in the agenda packet, on how to get you comfortable with reviewing a case where there is a use of force or response to resistance allegation. It is a 1 allegation case. I believe that we can accomplish the expedited or the targeted training curriculum between here and July. So I'm gonna pull that up and discuss a little bit more what that entails. Are you able to see that table? It says preparation for conducting a hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is a compilation of training that you already had, some training that you already have with NACO, some that you haven't had, and other pieces of information. Overall, it is about 8 hours, and I believe that it's some of it's self-training. It's at your pace, so it can be accomplished between here and our June meeting. By our June meeting, if we accomplish this training and you record your training dates initial, we can have our mock hearing, the 2-on-1 scenarios, and that we're doing that setup for a few reasons. As you mentioned, you have the ability to do up to 1 more meeting, but right now we have only 2 people in our communications department. So scheduling another public meeting, it's a little bit difficult right now, but the 2-on-1 method allows you also to be able to uh, go through the mock exercise a little bit more freely, be able to make more mistakes without the public gaze, and be more freely in that regard. So there are benefits of doing it that way as well. But before we get there, you would have to review these different pieces of information. So one we're going to review tonight is a 15-minute video that was provided by FLETC, which is a federal law enforcement training academy. They essentially train most of all federal law enforcement agencies, about 105, and also international law enforcement officers come. It's a very well-prestiged institution, and they do provide some sound training. And that training is going to focus on Graham v. Conor, which is one of the most important cases as it relates to use of force. Mr. Jacobs was talking about reasonableness today, and Graham v. Conor also discusses reasonableness, but when you're talking about force cases, it's about the reasonableness of the officer depending on the totality of the circumstances. So that, and we're going to review that video, talk a little bit about it, and that's also in line with their general orders. The general orders essentially says that officers should try to resolve situations without having to use force. But when they have to use force, they should use the most minimal amount of force required. And the most minimal amount of force will be assessed by the totality of the circumstances in that particular situation. And that's just very concise summary. And you aren't expected to be subject matter experts on use of force. What your role is as board members is to look at the internal affairs file and see if they went through all the proper procedures to determine whether the use of force was assessed appropriately. So that's what we're trying to get you to be able to do by July. We'll review that case. You've had the training from Chief Brackney on how they do internal affairs investigations, so you can review that again. There's also another training that Sergeant Wade did for the Police Foundation, and that I provided a link there. Both trainings go over the internal affairs investigations process. So both of them are good sources of information. You can review one or the other or both if you have time. There's one important video that you've had from your training with NACO, and that was the effective practices in conducting and reviewing investigations. And that I put the Boxcast. That's the Boxcast link to your training that you already had. I would highly recommend you review it again, because it did talk about what makes a good investigation as opposed to what makes a bad investigation. Some of you I believe all of you were present, but you all asked some very good questions that'll be helpful to have that refreshed. There was another training that I'm not sure if the board members were exposed to, but it is in the NACO webinar section, and also in their YouTube video channel. And that's on making factual determinations, applying legal standards, and reaching allegation and outcomes. And that was done by a practitioner oversight in the New York jurisdiction. Other pieces of information are the written material. So you'll have access to, as any community member does, to the general orders regarding internal affairs investigations, response to resistance or use of force, as it's more commonly referred to, and on the reporting guidelines. The reporting of use of force is another report that's not a CPD report. That's by the International Association of Chief of Police. That's a reference material that you're not necessarily required to review, but it gives you guidance on what you should be looking at when officers report use of force. The interim procedures link is there for your review as well. And the mock hearing exercise, will conduct that once everybody has reviewed this material. I believe, again, a reasonable time frame could be between here and the next meeting for everybody to review these these pieces of information, and then we can have the 2-on-1 scenarios. I want to stop there, see if anybody has any questions about that. that plan, if any have concerns about it, how reasonable it is for you.
Mr. Aguilar, how do we document when we've completed each of these modules?
So I attached a
Oh, I see it.
checklist
Yes.
that you can
Got it.
put the training dates and just initial.
Got it.
And I
Yep.
put some verbiage from the ordinance there that talks about the 8 hours that you're required. And these trainings, again, they're all about 8 hours, but you've had additional training beyond that that will still make you eligible to have this hearing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to stress the importance of participating here and being able to, so that we can all participate meaningfully in our in the one hearing that we have, and certainly the lessons that we learn will serve us well as we go forward.
Absolutely. And by this time, I've actually one of the tools that we're going to have at our disposal, and then actually built in with the procedures from the mock hearing, is for you to be able to have your city issued designated laptops. They are currently in the hands of Internal Affairs. I've checked with Steve Hawks, who's the IT director at the time, at the current time, and he has informed me that they're downloading all the necessary software that you need for it. What he wanted to know, what would be the best approach to getting you the laptops. They have to give you an overview of it. Do you want to do one-on-one on your time, or do you want us all to get together and then to issue the laptops? What would be the best approach for the board?
For well, I think out of necessity, I think the one-on-one is going to be the best option. Just trying to
I think getting this all together is going to be pretty hard.
Yeah.
But maybe they could give us a sign up list with times on it, and we can sign up for a time.
Is there do you know, Mr. Aguilar, about how long the overview would take?
Last I spoke with him, we talked in between anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes. And there's also that there's some cybersecurity training that you may have received a link to, but now you'll be able to do that with your city issued computers. I know some of you may have access issues to that, but now that will also be supplemental to what information they'll provide to you when they provide you the computers. So I'll communicate with the IT department and let them know if it sounds like there's consensus that one-on-one is the best approach. So I'll let them, ask them what their dates are and forward that information to the group. In the meanwhile, though, that shouldn't stop you to being able to access any of this information. We're really definitely going to need it by the time we have the hearing, because that's how the internal affairs file is going to be shared with you through the secured network.
And Mr. Aguilar, I assume that would be the case going forward on any new cases, that we'll be able to access them on the tablets or the Surface computer, whatever the computers are.
That's correct. You'll be able to access through SharePoint, the cases will be uploaded there for your review. The one thing that the body worn camera access, at this time, I'm the one that they're given the direct access to. So we still would have to do either the in-person review method, where I'll meet you at the office or at your place of convenience. You review the file, the video itself, or we could potentially do a remote viewing session together. And I know that there was an audio issue with the mock hearing, but I don't believe that should be an issue with other videos moving forward. Okay. did anybody have and I guess I can discuss offline specifically with the 2-on-2 pairs. But I didn't know if there were any particular dates once we get to that point for the mock hearing, if you would prefer it during the week, off hours, but I guess we can do that individually with that particular 2-on-2 pair or those pairs of individuals. So we'll discuss that down the line. The other item that I wanted to discuss outside of this this plan for the hearing is the retreat schedule. We have done the pre-retreat one-on-one interviews or 2-on-1. Now we have designated the date that seems to work for everybody on the 28th, which is a Saturday, which is the weekend, Memorial Day weekend, but it appeared to be the best day for everybody. We were able to talk with both Lisa and Cynthia, and because of the subject matter that we are going to be discussing personal issues and facilitating that discussion, we are able to utilize the closed meeting format, an exemption under FOIA. So one of the things that you would have to do in order to publicly notice that meeting is just to make a motion about that meeting date. And then as soon as you vote on it, we'll go ahead and publish that date and we'll notify the public and that it will be a closed meeting.
So we guess we need to do that now.
Yes, because we don't have any other meetings before.
Are we lacking a quorum now, Mr. Chair?
No, we have 4.
Four is good.
Oh, I'm missing somebody then.
James is dark.
Oh, okay.
I make a
There he is. Okay, hi, James.
motion. So I make a motion for May 28th to have the retreat. I make a motion that the May 28th meeting be a closed meeting.
Second.
Any discussion, or shall we just vote? Council?
Okay. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
She might be offline again.
okay. Member Frazier,
Yes.
Chair Mendez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Watson.
Yes.
Okay. Not publicly noticed that. And
Oh, we got, there we are with Nancy. So Nancy, we're voting to allow ourselves to have our retreat on the 28th to exercise the FOIA exemption to have it as a closed meeting.
Thank you. I apologize for the internet instability tonight. I think I finally rectified it. So you all are moving around and I see your lips moving as you're talking. So that's a good sign. But anyway, if we're voting, I vote aye, if that's what you need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
okay. Thank you for those votes. The next part, before I play the video, was the summer internships. Ella has finished her semester, so she will take a hiatus and return back to us in the fall. Hopefully, she's done some great work for us. But we are in the process of getting paired up with some KIP interns, so the high school interns, and we also have received some applications from college students and recent graduates that are interested in interning. I'm not sure if anybody would be interested in reviewing some of the applications with me, and hopefully we can avoid a meeting so that we can do a panel of 2 people, 2 board members and myself, so we could get the selection of the summer internship. Is anybody interested now, or feel free to send me an email after the meeting if you want to think about it a little bit more.
I'll do it. I'll work with you. Can you
Okay,
hear me?
I heard you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah,
You
I will too, Hansel, Mr. Aguilera. My schedule's pretty open.
You already have some you said on file now, or we're it's Kayak. So Kayak's already got a pool of city kids. My daughter, I was telling you, my daughter did Kayak like 6-7 years ago. It's a pretty good program. Very good program, actually.
Yeah, we have so for those who are not making a selection, there will be assigned based on the city's assessment. For the ones that I'm talking about are college students, we received 17 applicants.
Wow.
And
Oh, okay.
they were given a deadline of today to give us a cover letter, so I'll share those with you, and we'll go. We received about 5 cover letters, so it might have gotten a little bit confusing because we had a universal application, and not all of the applicants necessarily had an interest in the board's work. They might have just been interested in a general city internship. So, but I'll forward those cover letters, and we'll move with that process. Okay. And if there aren't any other questions, I wanted to go ahead and for us to review the Graham v. Conor video.
Take it away.
Okay.
Mr. Jacobs has his hand up, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Mr. Jacobs, yes.
Yes, sir. I know that y'all had mentioned that I haven't been present for your other board hearings, but you had mentioned that y'all would possibly make policy recommendations. Are you familiar with the Biloxi standard that the agency is currently using? If you're not, another resource would be Paul Intravea, the person who's a subject matter expert that aligns the policies with the police department, with the Biloxi, Virginia law enforcement standards and accreditation, with the rest of the policies on board with the Charlottesville Police Department.
Who is this person we should be speaking with?
Paul Intravea, if you have any questions regarding the alignment of the Charlottesville Police Department policies and the Virginia law enforcement standards and accreditation.
Okay. Well, thank you.
He's been updating a lot of those policies recently too. So if you have any questions about policy, he may be the person that you need to reach out to.
Is he local? Is he somewhere else?
He works at the Charlottesville Police Department.
Excellent. Thank you.
And sorry, could you spell his last name? Or I can send you an email or something like that.
Yeah, I give you my best guy. I think it's Intravia.
Okay.
But I mean, I can I'll shoot him an email and send it to you, I guess, so that that y'all have his contact.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. I'll go ahead and play the video.
All right.
Is the sound coming through?
Nope. We may have to. We might have to go all click on the hyperlink to get it to.
One second. Let me just.
It's funny. Zoom has been doing that lately. It's like there's some kind of a setting. You used to be able to play video. And I've noticed that lately when you play a video, the sound doesn't come through.
So yeah, you can get it by clicking the hyperlink, but don't know so far.
Oh, who was playing it? Because it was sounding. Whoever.
That was me. That was me.
Do you want to share the screen? And
Oh, okay. Well, I wonder if okay, let me see what I can do. Okay, well, I wasn't, see,
oh,
I'm on YouTube now,
Okay.
so I don't know if I can share my screen. Sorry.
At the bottom, do you see a green share screen where the other icons are?
No, sorry.
Okay. Let me try it again. Maybe if I take it off my,
Can you hear it?
Yes.
How will I be judged if someone sues me for using excessive force? That's a fair question for a student at the Federal Law
Got it.
Centers. Hi, my name is Tim Miller. I'm an instructor at the Legal Division for the Center at Glencoe, Georgia. The leading case on use of force is the 1989 Supreme Court decision in Graham versus Conor. The court stated that all claims that law enforcement officers have used excessive force, deadly or not, in the course of an arrest, investigatory stop, or other seizure of a free citizen should be analyzed under the Fourth Amendment and its objective reasonableness standard. So what happened? Mr. Graham was actually a good guy. Unfortunately, he was also a diabetic. And feeling the onset of an insulin reaction one day, he called his friend Barry and asked for a ride to a convenience store. He hoped to buy some orange juice and thought that the sugar in the juice would counteract the reaction. After the two men arrived at the store, Graham got out of the car and hastily went inside. But the checkout line was too long. Mr. Graham turned around and hastily returned to the car. In his diabetic state, he probably didn't think to ask to jump to the head of the line. Back inside the car, he told Barry to drive to another friend's house. Maybe the friend would have some juice. Waiting and watching outside the store was Officer Conor. Officer Conor had watched Mr. Graham hastily enter and then leave the store. Conor suspected something was amiss. He followed the two men for a block or so and then activated his overhead lights, signaling for them to stop. Beside the road, Barry tried to explain that Graham was just having a sugar reaction, but Conor was not convinced. Conor told the two men to wait at the car. He then directed another officer to return to the store to determine what happened. Well, things got worse from that point. Graham got out of the car. He ran around the car 2 times, sat on the curb, and momentarily passed out. Backup officers arrived. Mr. Graham was handcuffed, thrown into the back seat of a police car. All this time, Barry and Graham, after he regained consciousness, tried to explain that his friend was just having an insulin reaction, but their pleas had no effect. Then Conor received the report from the officer who returned to the store. Nothing was amiss, and Mr. Graham sued the officers. So how should Officer Conor and these other officers be judged? On the one hand, Mr. Graham was an innocent man. On the other, the officer did not know that at the time. The Supreme Court stated that Conor and the other officers should be judged under the Fourth Amendment's objective reasonableness test. That test could be boiled down to 3 questions. First, what did the officer do, or what was the force he used? Second, what were the facts confronting the officer at the time he used force? And second, could a reasonable officer believe that what the officer did fell within the range of reasonableness after applying the facts to the Graham and other factors for using force? Note that the perspective that counts is the reasonable officers, which is obviously the court looking at the facts through the lens of this hypothetical officer. The point being, the subjective beliefs of the actual officer, whether good or bad, are not relevant. Officer Conor may have honestly believed that Mr. Graham was a shoplifter. However, the court's objective test asks what a reasonable officer could believe. Reasonable force is from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene. This reasonable officer considers the totality of the facts and circumstances confronting the officer at the time. The only caveat on what can be considered is the no 20/20 hindsight rule, something that was not reasonably known when the officers stopped Mr. Graham and placed in handcuffs was the report from the officer who returned to the store. Nothing was amiss, but to consider that report would be judging Conor and the other officers by hindsight. The no 20/20 hindsight rule, well, it probably worked to Officer Conor's favor in this case. But what if Officer Conor had learned while writing a use of force report that his suspect had a violent criminal history? Whether force is reasonable or not depends on the facts confronting the officer at the time. So, could a reasonable officer believe that stopping Mr. Graham, handcuffing him, and forcing him into the back of a police car was objectively reasonable? The Supreme Court stated that was the relevant question. What follows are some facts and circumstances that could help a court make that decision. They are for illustrative purposes, and not all of them are in the Graham decision. For example, Officer Conor might write in his use of force report, "I saw Mr. Graham run into the store. The door had barely closed to the convenience store before I saw him open it and run back out to Mr. Berry's car and get into the car. I heard the tire screech as the driver sped away at a high rate of speed." Well, would that be enough to stop the two men? The Supreme Court's decision in Terry versus Ohio states that an officer may conduct a temporary investigative detention based on reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. An officer's training and experience is also relevant in making that decision. Conor might add, "Based on what I saw and my department receiving several complaints of shoplifting from this store over the past several weeks, I activated my overhead lights and stopped the car." Conor would be admitting to effecting a Fourth Amendment seizure, but a seizure is reasonable when the officer can point to specific articulable facts that criminal activity is afoot. It should be obvious by now that the officer must help the court visualize what happened. Using good action verbs in a report, what you saw, said, or heard makes that visualization possible. Conor might write, "After Barry stopped, I walked to his car." Now, walked is a good action verb. The listener can visualize or see Conor walking. The report might continue, "I told both men to stay in their car. I ordered another officer to go back to the convenience store and ask what happened. Next, I saw Mr. Graham get out of the car. Graham opened the passenger door. He ran around the car 2 times, sat down on the curb, and fell over as if he had passed out." Officers can make objective opinions. Now, objective opinions are supported by facts. Conor might add, "It was my opinion at the time that Mr. Graham was under the influence of alcohol. I make that opinion based upon my years of experience with intoxicated people. They are generally irrational. Graham was not rational. He ran around a car 2 times after I, a police officer, told him to wait inside. Traffic was on the road. Then he sat on the curb and fell over as if he had passed out." To further support his opinion of intoxication, Conor might add, "I saw that Graham's eyes were glassy. His speech was slurred. His breath smelled sweet, as if he had been drinking alcoholic beverages. Incidentally, a diabetic's breath may also smell sweet." Conor might explain why intoxication is so relevant. Someone who's not thinking rationally could have stepped out into the traffic and caused an accident, he might state. Moreover, people under the influence of alcohol or narcotics, they're less likely to obey an officer's commands and more likely to be assaultive. Facts paint the picture. Facts allow the court to picture what happened and then make an objective decision. But mere conclusions make someone ask how or why. An example of a mere opinion might be simply stating, "Graham was non-compliant. How was he non-compliant?" Cop talk creates the same confusion as mere conclusions. Consider, "He made a furtive movement." How does someone make a furtive movement? And pre-assault indicator? What's a pre-assault indicator? One more, other words of caution might be, stay clear of this. Stay clear of fuzzy words like he indicated, suggested, or implied something. How? How did he suggest? How do we imply that? Reports should state what the officer saw, heard, and said. Good fact articulation is not easy. It also takes time. What's more, officers may experience tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, memory loss, but they should paint the picture with the sights and sounds that they remember. While it may be impossible to recall exactly what someone said, the officer may still remember, "He screamed at me and clenched his fist like a boxer." The Supreme Court stated, "The test for reasonableness under the Fourth Amendment is not capable of precise definition or mechanical application." In short, there are no perfect answers. The perfect answer in Graham's case might have been for Officer Conor to walk inside the convenience store and escort Mr. Graham to the head of the line. But that would require Conor to know all the facts. It would be judging him by hindsight. Allowance must also be made for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. Conor made a decision after Graham got out of the car. Obviously, there were other options. And while hindsight may prove one option better than another, what matters is whether the option chosen fell within the range of reasonableness based on the facts confronting the officer at the time. Reasonable force is a balancing test. The facts confronting the officer at the time are applied to the Graham and other factors for using force. The Graham factors are reasons for using force. They act like a checklist of possible justifications for using force. They are not exhaustive, and not all of them are maybe apply in every particular case. The Graham factors are the severity of the crime, the immediacy of the threat, and whether the suspect was actively resisting or trying to evade an arrest or other lawful seizure by flight. The severity of the crime generally refers to the underlying reason for seizing someone in the first place. Officer Conor appeared to be acting under a reasonable suspicion that Graham stole something from the convenience store. While that suspicion proved incorrect, the question is whether it was reasonable at the time. Arrests and investigative detentions are traditional governmental reasons for seizing people. It could also be reasonable to seize someone who is not suspected of any wrongdoing. Reasonable force can be used to control the movements of a passenger during a traffic stop. It may be used to detain someone in or around a home while executing a warrant for contraband. The operative word for any type of seizure is reasonableness, which always depends on the facts. Let's skip immediacy of the threat for a moment and go to resistance and flight. Resisting a lawful seizure affects several governmental interests. It may prevent the officer from executing a warrant, or in Officer Conor's situation, prevent him from completing his investigation. Remember, too, that Conor told Graham to stay in the car, and that Graham arguably resisted that order by getting out. He ran around the car, sat down on the curb. Traffic was on the road. He could have caused an accident or injured others. Now let's look at threat. The Graham factors cannot be considered in a vacuum. The nature of Graham's resistance could also support a threat to the safety of the officer or others. Threat is generally considered the most important governmental interest for using force. What's more, attempting to evade a lawful seizure by flight causes some of the same concerns as resistance and may also pose a serious threat. Two subsequent Supreme Court cases called Scott versus Harris and Plumhoff v. Reichert involve speeders. They fled when officers signaled them to pull over for traffic violations, and in doing so caused a significant threat to everyone on the road. The lower courts would go on to add other factors. For example, what was the known violent criminal history of the suspect? Another might be the suspect's size, height, weight, condition compared to that of the officer. And the presence of innocent bystanders is also a factor to consider. But while the courts have listed other factors to consider, they are generally a subset of what is considered the most important Graham factor, immediacy of the threat. In Graham, the offense at issue was possible shoplifting, and the initial intrusion on Mr. Graham's liberty was only sitting in a car. As the encounter developed, however, the intrusion on his liberty became greater. But didn't the governmental interest for more force also become greater? Again, Officer Conor told the men to wait at the car. Graham resisted that order by getting out. Add that to his irrational behavior and the possibility he might get out on the road and cause an accident. Maybe I should ask you, could a reasonable officer believe that what the officers did, the force they used, fell within the range of reasonableness after applying the facts confronting them at the time to the Graham and other factors for using force? This has been Fletzy Talks. I'm Tim Miller, and thank you for listening.
Couple of things that come to mind when I watched that. The first one is that I'm very, very glad that I'm not a poor Black man in Charlotte, North Carolina, who has diabetes. I'm sorry, but if something like that happened to me and my wife, there wouldn't be the snowball's chance in hell if the policeman wouldn't believe me and take me to the hospital. And the idea that a policeman doesn't have a responsibility to the safety of the public when there's something as trivial as possible shoplifting involved strikes me as being rather, incomprehensible. I've done a little background research on Graham, and there's a strain in the legal justice community that says that Graham pretty much gives the police sort of a blank check for using force, particularly that they couldn't have known rule. Well, if they knew about diabetes, they might have known. But anyway, if they've been trained better, they might have known. In our deliberations, we're not going to be dealing with the constitutionality of stops mostly. We're going to be dealing with whether they complied with standing orders for the Charlottesville Police Department. And so our decision criteria, will be somewhat different. So anyway, that's just my blowing off steam here. I have a question for Mr. Jacobs. I don't know if you know the answer. The Supreme Court remanded the case to the lower court for reconsideration. Was the policeman's action reasonable under this new standard? Do you know what happened? I have not been able to find out whether poor Mr. Graham ever got any vindication, or whether the police stop stood.
I'm not aware. I can't speak on the case after it left the Supreme Court. I know that it was originally viewed or weighed under the 14th Amendment guidelines.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court, indicated that it has to be weighed under the 4th Amendment. And as you indicated, there's strengths and weaknesses to that argument. I mean, our greatest justices in the United States don't always agree. That's why we have so many split decisions as well. So, but that is one of the precedents set by the case, is to guide our understanding in application based on reasonableness.
Well, thanks. Ms. Hudson, welcome. Good to see you.
Hi, sorry to be
By the way-
late. I've had some traffic issues today that waylaid me at a time when my phone was dead and all other means of communication were just not available as I was stuck on the road. So again, apologize for being late.
Well, yeah, Ms. Hudson, we have Larry Jacobs here, who's the Fourth Amendment analyst for the CPD.
Yes, Mr. Jacobs, hello. Regarding your question about the ultimate disposition of Graham v. Conor, I'm glad to take a look at that. Very often these things disappear after they've gone to the Supreme Court and are disposed of in a certain way because the parties settle. And that and I'm not saying that that's what happened in Graham v. Conor, but I'll be glad to find out for you just to satisfy your curiosity.
Yeah, and I just can't emphasize enough that this big constitutional question that may not be all of the obligations or responsibilities that we would want to place on a police officer in Charlottesville, So anyway, so it has just one more thing, Cynthia. I mean, has sort of the post-Graham jurisprudence gone in any particular direction with regard to reasonableness, a reasonable officer?
Well, Graham v. Conor is still good law. It has not been overruled. Has not been curtailed in any significant respect that I'm aware of. There are varying applications of Graham v. Conor where it appears, at least to me sometimes, that courts are being result oriented, where the very, I think, broad discretion given to well, I shouldn't say discretion, but the standard created by Graham v. Conor, it can be very difficult for there to be liability under that standard. And sometimes you do see courts struggling to not reach a conclusion where that Conor might otherwise dictate, indicating that an officer did act reasonably. And courts have sometimes, I think, gone in a direction where they wanted to achieve a certain result that Conor might not otherwise dictate. But it hasn't been overruled. It's still good law.
Sure. Okay. So Hansel, did you have anything you wanted to say about the video, or?
No, I would
anyone
just,
else?
if I may, Chair, I would just say, just encourage you to review it again. As Ms. Hudson said, it's still good law, and that is the analysis that Internal Affairs would apply when they're reviewing these use of force response or resistance cases. Also, make sure you review the general order. There are also other case laws in there that talk about other factors that they will be considering. I did want to just address something Member Brown stated about the BWC compliance, and I'll tie it to this as well. But in my proposed audit, I did talk about reviewing BWC compliance. That is something that I think is important for the community to be aware of if they're utilizing a lot of money to make sure that officers have this technology. We have to make sure that it's being utilized appropriately, to turn it off on correctly when they're required to, and off at the time they're supposed to. But there's also another element about that was referenced in there. It was the 20 hindsight. And this is a broader policy issue that in the oversight community, other technologists are discussing. Should officers be able to review body-worn camera before they write their reports, particularly use of force reports? And as they noted in that video, they talked about hindsight 2020. Well, did the officer know that there was a weapon behind them, or perceived a weapon at the time? They might have not known it, but then they reviewed the body-worn camera footage, and now they can see other things that may give more reasonableness to the action that they undertook. So that's just a broad application of how another element, policy element of this, the hindsight 2020, and how body-worn camera and these technologies are being utilized to make these decisions, and when should officers be able to review it, and when should they not be able to review it?
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So apparently it was remanded because the court utilized the Johnson v. Glick test under the 14th Amendment as opposed to the 4th Amendment. And the court was saying that when it comes to uses of force, only the 4th Amendment is really the guiding force, not the 14th Amendment itself.
Yeah, now my question was, when it was remanded, what did the lower court then do?
Very well.
Was it actually, did they uphold the seizure? That's all, and I haven't been able to find that out. So, and Ms. Hudson pointed out that may well have been just settled. So, but anyway. So I don't know that our other our training materials will be as sort of exciting as that. Now, Bellamy, did you have something to do with the revision to the resistance to force general order?
No. There was an update at one point in time that Chief Brackney had done on the basis of, I think it had to come into play with, I think it had to do specifically with dogs or something. And so there was an update on that, but there was nothing that that I had done.
Yeah, okay. So all right. See what we got here. So are there any other questions related to the executive director's report?
Were we just watching the video, or were we going to discuss it, or?
Well, I've been trying to get a discussion going here. Anybody?
What? So I mean, there were there were a number of things that I guess jumped out for me. I mean, even if let's say you go in and out before the door closes, well, how long does it take a door to close? 30 seconds max. So it's like, what can you determine from, oh, he's in and out? And then the other things that stuck out were, well, you didn't see an attendant coming out of this store yelling, "Hey, stop this man," or anything like that. In addition, there was a following for some time before initiating the lights, the overhead lights, but there's no report of any calls coming through of a theft or anything like that. And this is all before you get to the actual detention. So those are things, and just as you articulated earlier, and I think there are some things that NACOL has presented as the issue of bias there. And one of the things that jumped out for me was, did race actually play a factor? If this was a white person who had gone in and out 30 seconds max, and drove away for some time, what would that person have been stopped? And I believe that adding more information to that in general, specifically here in the Commonwealth, the state police have published reports of Black and brown folk being stopped at a larger rate than white folk. So I mean, those are just things that jump out to me even before you get to a stop. And yeah.
And again, maybe Cynthia can explain this to me, but I guess the complainant did not bring up race as a factor. Didn't make it a civil right. It didn't make it a.
I'm not aware. I didn't read, review Graham v. Conor in advance of this, and haven't had occasion to drill down into it in a very long time.
Okay, well, that's fine. And also, just in terms of reasonableness, you should point out that Mr. Graham ended up with a broken ankle and a contusion on his head, and then maybe that's just because he was running around in a hypoglycemic daze. But I'm sorry, that sort of raises the question about the degree of force versus the severity of the potential crime that had been committed. Anyway, anyone else? Any reaction?
I thought Mr. Jacobs raised his hand at a point. I don't know if it was.
Did you? Yeah, Larry, did you have something?
I just I briefly mentioned earlier on the onset of my introduction that as I stated, probable cause, no warrant shall be issued, except for based upon probable cause. No person should be seized or detained unless that judicial review has already occurred. But I mentioned that there were 13 exemptions to that. And, Terry versus Ohio, stop and frisk, search incident to arrest. I have a little short summary of those. It doesn't go into all the case law relating to all of those, but some of that may be important for your general knowledge as well. Protective sweeps, consent searches, custodial arrests, exigent circumstances, automobile exceptions, abandoned property, all those things. At least a general overview of those topics probably would be good for you to be aware of too, since those 13 exemptions borders isn't one typically handled by local law enforcement. Open fields isn't another one that's not typically applied, but those 13 generally probably would be good to at least have a general understanding of some of those exemptions to those warrants.
Yeah, and I just point out for the benefit of the board that the Plexi, has several dozen similar videos on their websites about Kelly and a lot of the other Fourth Amendment cases. So if you want to go there and explore, that's great.
And I know Ms. Hudson could, provide you with any documentation that you need, but I just wanted to reference those exemptions. Those are the underlying premise to a lot of the officer initiated contacts. So just figured that I would mention them to you since y'all would be aware of some of the other underlying case law as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm speaking for myself, I'm an idealist, and I think that I would like to, to envision a world in which someone who is having a hypoglycemic crisis will be driven to the hospital by the police rather than being arrested until he goes into a coma. And that, the police establishment, training, general orders should make that more likely. And that's kind of what we're here for. Yeah, if there's no more, comments here, certainly, I know that the first time I looked at that video, a lot of it went by over my head. So certainly I recommend people, take another 13 minutes and look through it again, and get a little more of the detail, because it's very, very useful. And so maybe at our next meeting, we can, talk about the resistance to force guidance in some detail. James.
That just made me think of something that me, you, and Hansel had talked about a little bit about a week and a half or so ago. When we go in and do our mock trial or our separate two-person groups, do we think it would be best to all look at the same, the same case, or do different cases? Or have we really decided what we're going to do?
So it was my understanding from that discussion, we're going to all use the same case. I think if we
Yeah.
want to stick to that time frame, it'll probably be best too, because I'm
Right.
finalizing the preparation for that case file. I wanted to match what you would see in a CPD case file. So I've already got the blank forms that they use. It's just a matter of transcribing the fact pattern onto those forms.
And you're dealing with securing a hearing examiner also?
Correct. And that is going to be facilitated mostly by Lisa.
Okay.
Will we be able to come back together at some point as a group, since we're not using names, we're not using a completely real case, and discuss sort of our, what our findings, recommendations, or are we just going to be in that, is the plan to just be in that two-person group? And, is there going to be any kind of debrief or outbrief? Because it may be good to see what other people have to say beyond, whoever you're partnered up with.
Yeah, we can hope that by, by next month,
Right.
that, at least a couple of us will have, gone through the mock hearing. And at least maybe we can get sort of a preview of, is not so much what the results are as what the difficulties we encountered were as we go through it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. So we got a whole big bunch of stuff to do, plenty to keep us busy. Please don't hesitate to call me or Hansel if you have any issues. Without objection, if there is no objection, I'll move on to the next item, which is the committee formation. last meeting sort of gave everyone sort of a template and invited folks to think about what committees they wanted to be involved with. And Mr. Jacobs, if you're busy or if you want to get home to your family, we really appreciate your coming, and it's no problem. So if you need to leave, fine. And in any event, we got our, we asked for volunteers for our various committees. I've received, we have a de facto executive committee, which is James and I, the chair and vice chair, and we have our responsibilities for interacting with Hansel and with the chief of police and so on. Also, Bellamy has volunteered to serve with me on the finance committee, which would deal with our budget and with the annual examinations of the annual budget that we are allowed to do according to our new ordinance. And I've also invited folks to volunteer for outreach. And we've had several people who have contacted me, more than two. And so I'm a little confused as to who actually is really interested in doing that. It's not something we need to resolve right now. But if there's someone who wants to lead that and has some ideas for outreach events, we can, let us know, give me a call, we can work on it this next month. What I would like to do tonight is under our new operating procedures, under our old operating procedures, we had no committees. Under our new operating procedures, we are required to vote on the membership of committees. And so what I would like is to entertain a motion that the board recognize the chair and vice chair as members of the executive committee. Anybody want to move that?
I make a motion.
Second, anywhere? Any comments, questions? Mr. Aguilar?
Ms. Hudson, I'm sorry, did you have a comment or question? Oh,
No.
Okay.
I was just moving my hand.
okay. Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Chair Mendez,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Watson.
Yes.
And I would also like to solicit a motion that Mr. Brown and I be accepted as members of the Finance Committee.
I make a motion.
Second.
Any comments, questions? Mr. Aguilar?
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Chair Mendez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Watson.
Yes.
Okay, and as I said, thank you for what I believe is a vote of confidence, and we will, both committees will continue to report to you as to our activities going forward. I think Hansel and I, and a number of members of the board also agree that having an outreach committee is also sort of the minimum.
Yeah.
And so if in the next, the next month, we can resolve who that would be. Now, Nancy, are you interested in doing this, leading?
Well, I will make one comment about the outreach committee. I mean, both myself and Ms. Gilmore have end dates, on this board in February. So it would seem to be a smart idea to have a couple of people, one that might be ending, and if they're not going to re-up, and then someone who is, recently been reappointed for another multi-year term to be able to, have continuity of, of whatever the strategies are in conducting outreach.
Yeah, no,
Is a comment I have.
Yeah, point is well taken. That I think, though, that we are going to be, as a matter of course, re-electing all of our committee members each year anyway. So, no one's asking for.
That's true. I forgot about that.
No one's asking for a really, long, and if you.
Oh, that's true. That's
and if you and Deidre,
yeah, all that commentary you were making, or Michael was making, was when I was having instability in my internet connection, so I missed a lot of those comments. But yeah, you've refreshed my memory about that.
So is that something that you would be interested in? You can consider?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay, and then so I can, if you can, secure the cooperation of Deidre, and if she's not interested in working on that, then we can solicit other members of the board to be involved.
Oh, you want me to contact her? Why not you?
Well, you're the committee chair.
No, I'm not. I'm just a member. We haven't elected a committee chair yet.
Oh,
don't give me executive privilege until I earn it.
Okay, well, let us, James, did you have a thought there?
I was actually thinking about how our terms, I think Nancy and I I think our terms probably end at the same time, because I think just the three of us are the only original people still on the island from the beginning. So that's just something to keep in mind. The city council doesn't have a great, not to hate on them, but a great past of getting new people on the board. So we got something we got to kind of just keep in mind as we're moving out over the next few months, because we still have vacant positions, is my understanding. So, but outside of that, I'm also interested in the outreach committee. I don't know if there's a minimum or maximum number of people. I have been talking to, now that we're starting to get out a little bit more. I've been lucky enough to get invited to a few different events. The United Way they've been doing events lately where they actually record a podcast, and they try to get primarily African American members of the community that maybe people don't see every day, that are really committed to improving the community. So I went to an event the other day and talked to a few folks from United Way about our board, and they'd be interested in collaborating at some point. So we might be able to link up with them when they have some, they're obviously well established. They were also doing, the event I was with was also in conjunction with the Minority Business Council. I think Bellamy does a little bit of something with that group, I believe. So it was, definitely an opportunity to link up with them. And while at that same event, I met a lady named Courtney Hawkins, who is, she got hired by UVA Police Department for their diversity and inclusion manager. So had a good conversation with her. So I think now that we're starting to, get out of the mask stuck inside, reality, you all know I'm crazy busy, but definitely something I'm interested in, so I'd definitely like to be part of that as well with Nancy and Miss Gilmore. So
Yeah. Excuse me.
What do you say?
That would be a public meeting.
Yeah, if we have.
We can't. Oh, that's why you can't have three people. Okay, I forgot about
that. Well, only if you had three people meeting. I mean, we could tag team with James.
Right.
I mean, he could be, you get Deidre and myself and James, and you could tag team with him, one meet with them, another meet
Well,
with them.
why don't you work it out? And let me know.
Can we print out any kind of, I know you had some card ideas the other day, Hansel. That was something a little different, but like when I was at the event, I wanted to be able to, I could hand them my own personal business card. It has nothing to do with the review board or the oversight board, but I think if we had something tangible also, and I mean, I can develop that, but I don't know. I know sometimes like localities can't print. I know with the federal government, they can't print their own business card because they can't market, but yeah, if we can have maybe even maybe develop a card or something. And one of my reluctancies early on too was, with some of this outreach is we didn't have any teeth for anything. So it was like, I'm here to help you, but I got nothing to help you with, but I want to help you, kind of felt a little bit like that for most of the time we've been in this. But anyway, so yeah, there is potential to link up with some existing nonprofits and other groups that are out there doing hard work every day.
Hustle.
Yeah, if I may, we do have outreach material that I have drafted, and I want to make sure we have a collaborative spirit here. So I haven't produced or printed anything until we have an outreach committee that can oversee that and sign off on it. So it would be extremely helpful if you can today. It seems like you have Ms. Carpenter and Mr. Watson formalize that committee, and we could start going. I also want to emphasize that we're reaching the end of our fiscal year, so we're at a point where we're potentially gonna have to give money back to the city pot if we don't use it. And this would be a good opportunity to get a lot of printing done, stuff that we don't have to worry about next year and overhead for next year.
Mr. Aguilar, as a newly appointed member of the finance chair, is my understanding that the capital that was already allocated to the board would not have to be given back. That's ours to utilize throughout. So if you could get clarification on that, because that should remain with us, we shouldn't lose that at all.
So there's two pots of money. There's their operating budget that you get every year, $350,000. That is use it or lose it. So that's the money. We're gonna have a surplus this year, primarily also because I didn't start in the beginning of fiscal year, and I take up 40% of your budget. So we're still gonna have money. We have the savings aside. That money's not going away anytime soon. And I have been given information by the budget department that money is set aside for us. But what I'm speaking to is the operating budget for each year that you get.
So, and so the 350 is what I recall in a former meeting, and I'll have to go back and look at it, that is ours regardless. We're not supposed to lose that at all.
No, so you're not losing it per se. You just didn't use it during your fiscal year that it was allocated for. And if it's not used within the fiscal year, it has to go back to the general pot. That's across the board for any department. They get an allocated budget. If they don't use it during their fiscal year, it goes back to the general pot. You're gonna get another 350 for the next fiscal year.
So what about the audit money?
That is part of your
That's
savings.
solid.
That's set us right.
That's solid. Okay, so those are the two pots of money. Yes. Okay. James?
I'm not staring at the agenda right in front of me, but I know there was a software program that you were talking. There was a couple of software programs, and I was thinking that some of the money, if that's something everybody agreed on, you can talk a little bit about that, Hansel.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So we talked today about this targeted training for your pending hearing, but there's more robust training that you're going to get. There are other topics that, as Mr. Jacobs brought up today, the exceptions and different things for you to consider. But outside of use of force, there's other policies that you need to know. So we have a robust training curriculum for that. We were in the process of actually executing the way to get that done. But then we had the departure of one of our communication folks. So that's not feasible right now. But another tool that we can utilize is a scenario-based training system. And you may have heard of different brands and company. Milo is one of the big ones. They're usually created for law enforcement agencies to be able to do real life scenarios where they can make decisions. They're not really made for oversight world. However, I believe we can repurpose it. There's one particular company that has a training curriculum. It's called, the company's Vitra. That's the name of the company. It has a Be Victor curriculum, as they call it. And it has different topics that are very specific to the kind of work that in the knowledge that you need to do this work. Dealing with individuals with mental illnesses, dealing with individuals that are unhoused, and a bunch of different scenarios and training topics. I believe that we have a unique opportunity to secure this training, scenario-based training system right now, because we have this money that we're probably not going to have in other years as for operating budget. The range of it is from 15,000 to 94,000, and it really depends on the upgrades that you get for it. The way I envision we can utilize it is for board members to have run through these drills, so they can get a better understanding of what police officers would face. And this also, I would say, satisfies the alternative training that board members wanted outside of ride-alongs. So you're going to have the opportunity to have these kind of scenarios that you're exposed to. You also have a built-in curriculum that is already approved by the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. And we can also utilize, because it's portable, it's a screen and a projector. We could actually take it out and do some public outreach with it, some public education. We could start dialogue. We can have community members go through the scenarios and say, what would you do if you were an officer? What would you like for an officer to do? And these are the kind of things that we can do with this particular system. I got an updated quote because we didn't need all of the law enforcement upgrades to it. So the updated quote, I think it was around 30,000. And then they have an annual service fee that's optional. That's 10% of the cost of your total cost. And we're at a position where we can buy the system, and we could buy up to 5 years of the annual service plan if we wanted to. And we will still have a surplus after that.
Well, it's a fairly significant investment, and I think that probably at least one member of the finance committee would like to have a better idea of what we were actually buying. So perhaps you could forward the quote that they have to us, to Bellamy and I. And he and I can discuss it, and if the board would approve, you could prospectively allow us to use our judgment as to whether we think we want to buy it.
Would that require a Miss Hudson, you could probably answer it. Would this require a motion now at this point for board approval to rely on the judgment of the chair and I? Oh, you're on mute.
I think that would be appropriate just to be on the safe side. You'd have a record of that authorization.
James, you got a question?
My question will kind of mess up the flow of what maybe we'll stay on this topic, and then I'll ask that question in a minute or two, the question I had in mind.
So I need a motion to give the finance committee discretion to advise the executive director on the purchase of this software.
I make a motion.
A second. Okay, Jeff. Okay. Hansel, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question? Or?
It's a comment. I'll bring it up after the vote. You want me to poll?
Okay.
Okay. Member Brown?
Yes.
Member Carpenter?
Yes.
Member Frazier?
Yes.
Chair Mendez?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Watson?
didn't quite come through, James.
Yes.
There you go.
All right.
If
Okay. Yeah, go
before
ahead, Tim.
before we leave this topic, and this is for, I don't know if Councilor Payne is still here, but this is, I think, one of the areas where it would have been, and it's still probably a little bit more helpful for interpretation. And I'm not suggesting that there's going to be any issues down the line, but there isn't really very strict guidance on how these funding decisions are made. There is a scenario where the board may disagree with an executive director's recommendation to purchase something. So how does that get resolved? And the ordinance isn't abundantly clear on that particular matter. There is guidance from the city that is usually the executive that administers the budget. So I just want you to be mindful of this potential scenarios. And I'm not saying that they're going to be a lot down the road, but this might be something that be helpful to have city council's interpretation on.
Yeah, and I don't anticipate that we're going to have a great disagreement, but I think we do want to get some, buy-in. I'm not really comfortable until I know more about the package we're going to be buying. So.
Well, I think the scenario sets up that there would have to be a consensus on the finance committee. So the executive would not be allowed to, run away with the show. And that gives the rest of the board members, the opportunity to have, that discussion, that information, or after the fact, be informed about that. If that makes.
I mean, unfortunately, I believe Hansel has been engaged in, conversations with, the city manager's office and city attorney. And there is a strain of opinion that he's the boss. And so
I'm sorry.
That he's the boss. That he makes the decision. That Hansel makes the final decision
on the executive
on
the funding,
on spending money. Michael just raised his hand, so I don't know whether you can. Michael, can you clarify?
Sure. Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't have clarity to give you because I think it is still a gray area, but I would just share some thoughts. Actually, earlier today, CRHA had a work session that went over a document that was outlining the expectations between the CRHA board and their executive director. I think maybe developing something like that could be helpful. Just my 2 cents, my experience. An effective organization clearly defines those roles. In council's context, it's our city manager, equivalent of executive director, handling those operations. The council, aka the board, sets the policy direction. But having those boundaries be very well known, clearly established, in clear communication makes that successful. And I think to the extent that there are gray areas and not clear expectations, that does pose a very real risk of stymieing you down the road. So that's just sort of my 2 cents thoughts here in this.
Well, I thought the prior ordinance was clear in that the role was to be there to support the operations of the board, but the board is driving the ship itself, and you could very well say that spending up to $94,000 is in fact a policy decision based on the capital that the city council has allocated to the board.
And that's something that you all, will have to discuss and decide on. I've made a note of this and I'll bring it up with council. I don't have an answer to give you right now, but would just say if there's any uncertainty about it, definitely important to clarify it. And you've got to be in a position where you trust your executive director and your leader and know what the roles are. And but again, I've made a note of it. We'll bring it up. I don't have an answer to give you right now. And it sounds like that's something you are going to develop.
And Council Payne, I want to just direct you, once you review the operating procedures, there's in the appendix is a division of labor, which we try to outline what this will look like. There is discussions about what this relationship will look like. The thing is that we try to piece together the ordinance, the position description, and, you know, operating procedures, and try to make it in a way that it makes sense for all parties involved. So yeah, it will be helpful to hear what your thoughts are as a council on this matter.
Noted.
I mean, that being in line, and with some of the other issues and challenges, I don't want to get to a space to where this reverts back to the mean of stripping the board of the power that has been allocated by council itself in a gradual fashion. I think that the community has expected that this board will serve its interests, and if we start trekking down the line of saying that the city itself is going to make all the decisions for the board and the community members, I think that that's not necessarily the idea of the founding of this board itself.
Well, and I think I absolutely agree that they can give us all, we can be given all the powers that they want, but if, you know, spending our own money in the way we want is not one of those, then we're, you know, not going to get very far.
And that's, and you sorry.
No, I was just saying, on the other hand, I do not see a large potential for dramatic disagreement between us and Hansel on this issue. And it's certainly something that we can negotiate and work out. And that would be my recommendation.
And I've definitely noted that as well. And I'm just trying to share my 2 cents from a very different perspective of organizations that maybe weren't as effective as they could be, but that's a very different context and just my 2 cents.
Bellamy again.
Yeah, and I mean, and this isn't about Mr. Aguilar. This is about the role itself and under the city purview. Even if we go back to the General Assembly's you know, statute, they say that these powers are granted to the board in conjunction with the funding itself, and the funding is also to be directed, at least in my understanding, by the board as well. I mean, that's clearly written. We cannot engage in let's just go to operating procedures. We cannot engage in the exercise of the operating procedures without the capital being there that allows us to do that. And Ms. Hudson, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, or you're on mute.
Of course, I was just about to pull up the statute. As my recollection is that the statute speaks in terms of empowering localities, empowering cities and counties to create oversight boards of this nature, and states how they may empower them in terms of their jobs, their tasks, and as we have spent many months parsing out in the ordinance and in the operating procedures, but I did not recall any particular reference to fiscal responsibility being at least expressly afforded to the board. And I'd need to look at the statute again to know that. I'm glad to pull it up and check it out.
Yeah, I think there's, I mean,
sure.
Sure, and I think there is I mean, I specifically remember that you can set the policy, but you can't enact the policy unless you have the capital to support the policy itself. Those two go into conjunction. That's what I distinctly remember.
Okay. Well, if you all want to continue with your discussion while I pull up the statute, I'm going to try to do that now.
Well, and I just don't see we have by the resolution that we just passed, asserted the idea that we have power over the spending decisions of our board. And if someone wants to make an issue of that, well, okay, let's let them. But for the time being, I think we're in a reasonable place. You know, I don't think we need to. You know, we've staked out our position, and let's if they're going to stop us, then we can fight. Okay. So
Are you referring, Bellamy, to the authority that the statute enables for civilian oversight, police oversight bodies to make budgetary recommendations? I see that language, to make budgetary recommendations to the governing body of the locality regarding future appropriations. But
No, I'll have to.
Only reference I see to anything fiscal with respect to the authority of bodies such as this.
I believe
we have, if I recall, in our ordinance, we have a provision that says we can't exercise any of these powers except to the extent that they are only we can exercise powers if we have money that's been appropriated and allocated by the city, and I think
So,
is the only.
okay.
That's the
I
only.
guess it's the ordinance.
That's correct.
That's the only thing.
So my mistake, it wasn't the General Assembly, it was the ordinance itself that says that. That's.
Yeah, it just means we can't spend money we don't have. And it doesn't really say in the ordinance that only Hansel can spend the money. Although, you know, there may be some people in the city manager's office who might try and interpret it that way and will resist as appropriate.
As indicated that by Mr. Payne, it certainly makes sense for there to be some express rules of engagement around that sort of thing. And that might be something that the board would be wise to pursue, as he's already suggested.
Hansel, you got
Yeah, and I just want to say I definitely understand the sentiment Mr. Brown is saying. I think it creates a tension that I don't think it might have been an oversight by, you know, city council when they were giving these duties to the board and these duties to the executive director. In other jurisdictions and even our own, it's a little bit more obvious. So the Office of Human Rights has a Office of Human Rights and a Human Rights Commission. And so now those duties are a little bit more delegated, more properly lineated. We don't necessarily have this. I've always considered myself an appendage of the board in that providing the administrative support, but I also report to the city manager. So there's also that interplay there. I think what would be relevant within the ordinance is the section 2-455, where it talks about duties of the executive director. And it says the executive director shall support the board in the implementation and exercise of all of its functions authorized under the ordinance and to undertake or ensure the performance of specific tasks assigned by the board. So I think that is the broad language that I'm envisioning would allow me for being able to execute the desires of the board. I think moving forward, though, it also be helpful now that we have a finance committee that we can say, hey, this is going to be our year budget plan. This is how we. Now we're in, you know, towards the end of the fiscal year, and we're trying to find out, you know, what we can utilize the money for.
Yeah, I mean, that's, for me, it's the creep or the not fully apparent, but what seems to be a slow creep of going to a space of diluting the power of the board, and I'm thoroughly against that.
I agree fully, and that's why part of the reason why I suggested the resolution giving us the power to in essence approve or disapprove of this software package. You know, and if we say no, and Hansel wants to buy it, well, we'll just put that in his annual performance review. You know, I mean, he's not doing his job.
Maybe we just operate in that fashion where, you know, there's something that costs a significant amount of money like that comes up, that in his expertise he sees is something that would, elevate the board and put us in better position. We kind of do what we did earlier. Is like, okay, let's look into it, let's talk about it, let's discuss it. He's a highly intelligent guy. He's not going to go out and just buy something without,
Well, it's not. So, I mean, just to be clear, this is about the role. This isn't about the person. Mr. Aguilar could leave in a year and you have a new person and some of those things change. It's this delineation between these is what the board, these are the board's powers, is what it can do, versus this is what the executive branch of local government is doing. And we've always had this tension between what the executive branch versus what some of the boards are doing, and where the executive branch ends up trumping, some of these things. And with this, when we look at some of the resistance, from council, prior as well, those are things that, we've got to be concerned about.
Nancy?
Just a quick weigh in. I mean, I'm waiting to see what Counselor Payne comes back with before, we get ourselves all worked up about what's diminution of powers and what isn't. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna stand by and wait. So I'm not gonna have any particular feeling one way or the other until I hear that particular side of it. So thank you.
I think being still a fairly young board, then maybe that's something we look at trying to get more defined within the city ordinance. What is the role of the executive director when it comes to spending money? And if most people think, I think, yeah, I mean, we should really have the say, right? We're representing the community, and even the community should be weighing in what they feel to us. But it seems like over time we could try to work with city council to clearly define that, so there's no question.
Yeah,
right?
and
I mean, we're still, like I said, in early elementary phases here.
Yeah, let me.
And I think we're sort of going around in circles a little, but I think we're actually kind of on the same page of just saying it has to be defined. I'm not trying to tell you what it should be defined as, just it has to be explicitly defined.
Yeah, I was just going to say very quickly, this is not the first suggested amendment to the ordinance. And, let's see what happens in 6 months or a year. Nancy?
I'm sorry, I forgot to put my hand down. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we are going to consult with and advise Mr. Aguilar about the software package. Shall we move on to what is our next and almost last agenda item, which is our annual report, which is really going to be summarizing 3 years of our activities, or almost 3 years of our activities. I was hoping to have another draft this evening, but we do not. I have drafted the last year's history, sort of brought it up to date. We are the summaries for the 2021 internal affairs, the summary reports for the internal affairs investigations just came out a few days ago. And Ella, our administrative assistant, has taken it upon herself and has done a great job in extracting that data and putting it into a spreadsheet. And then the next few days, I'll be massaging that and looking at updating the sections of the report dealing with internal affairs cases, the number, the type, and what proportion are sustained and exonerated and so on. And that should not take very long. Also, Hansel has sent me a nice long set of templates. They're very fancy. They're very pretty, professional templates, and we will be testing and or selecting those for this next draft. And really honest engine, you will have it by next meeting. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. Okay, then the last item here is our second public comment period. Hansel, is there anyone, would anyone like to speak with us? I think you
Sorry,
need to.
I was
you-
moving my
Yeah.
my screen around. I have to read the magical language. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman. If you'd like to speak to the Police and Oversight Board, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, please dial *9. Each speaker will be allowed up to 3 minutes. Please share your place of residence when you begin.
Okay, it does not appear that anyone wishes to make any comments at this point. Is there a motion for adjournment?
Make a motion.
Second? Hansel?
Member Brown,
Yes.
Member Carpenter,
Yes.
Member Frazier,
Yes.
Chair Mendez,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Watson.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
All right.
And
See you.
Thanks,
night.
everyone. Good night.
Train. All right, bye-bye.
Good night.